toward nihilism and even toward barbarism if one includes particularly the Heideggerian crowd and to some extent a good many of the early writings of Foucault. And postmodernism now has gone wild. Gone absolutely wild now. It has turned experience into a process of linguistic deconstruction, or syntactic deconstruction, or textual deconstruction. The text has assumed autonomy over the author who does not exist. Now, if the author does not exist, where is the responsibility? Does texts have responsibility to each other? Does the Communist Manifesto, for argument's sake, have any responsibility to give or take Hitler's Mein Kampf? I'm sorry I used the word Hitler. Communist Manifesto to Mein Kampf? Are these merely challenging texts? Now, all of this leads to one thing that disturbs me, and it goes back to what I said just before. Every one of these tendencies not only accepts the fragmented reality that capitalism has finally produced, because what could be more fragmented than the market with its competitions between buyer and seller, and seller, and buyer. Just go into any supermarket and watch, or a Macy's or whatever these stores are called today, and watch people grabbing at each other, trying to get a fragment at a bargain price, each one competing with each other, and then watch them being conned by the owners of the store and lured in by lower prices only to have the prices jacked up after the competition has been wiped out elsewhere. This bothers me because this tendency to turn ideas into the differences between texts that have to be deconstructed, or an attempt to return to being, as Heidegger would have us, and never telling us quite what being is, some kind of prelapsarian world, or asking Foucault decentering power so much that one doesn't know where to aim one's thrust anymore. One doesn't know where to find the power that has to be undone so that people can become really empowered. Or going along with that total nihilist Jean Baudrillard, who has ended up expressly in nihilism, and says, essentially, have a good time. And then I have all those very wonderful anechoids, if I may use that expression, because I don't want to sully the word anarchist this way, who scream about having their desire fulfilled within the existing social order, or giving expression, mixing up situationism with surrealism, with postmodernism, with primitivism, the future primitive, to give you the title of one rather sickening work, in which everything went wrong after agriculture. Those anarchoids who think that by their individual self-expression, and by the way, many of them are very recent anarchoids, until relatively recently, a number of them denied that they were even anarchists, and throw Max Stirner at me in an argument. Max Stirner, who nobody quite knows whether he's on the left or on a proto-fascist right. He's published in both areas. This phenomenon of imagination, which I thoroughly endorse, but what is imagination, as Francisco Goya said, without reason? Imagination that is not guided by reason does indeed produce monsters. Hence my concern about the influence of the present climate today, with its prelapsarian mentality of going back to the beginning of something in its origins, with its attempt to utilize pluralism which dissolves any coherence. Everything is just a piece of something, or has its own identity, into identity politics, in which we are all fighting with each other. And blacks claim that they're more oppressed than women, so therefore the women's movement should subordinate itself to blacks and shut up. Or women who claim that the women's movement is more vanguard, if you like, and if they don't want to use the word vanguard, is more primal than blacks, or, and so on and so forth, that it should subordinate itself, or males generally should subordinate themselves. This is getting sickening already. This has got nothing to do with the left. What it has to do with chaos. That's what it has to do with. And it is exactly the chaos that capitalism studies and learns from. What a fashionable thing to think of promoting Prozac, or perhaps promoting even one day LSD. or to go ahead and have the total experience by taking a Caribbean trip, or to dress outrageously. Every fashion designer from Paris to L.A. or New York is watching these prelapsarian movements with a view toward making money out of this stuff. It does not challenge capitalism. On the contrary, it deflects you from the social situation. Like deep ecology, it turns you away from the real social problems, the real social causes of the ecological crisis, and turns you into a pure conservationist. Now, I would have nothing against it if deep ecology just stuck to conservation and shut its big mouth, if I may say this, about being ecological or being deep. So these things are a matter of concern to me insofar as they poison any possibility for a left emerging, and secondly, because they turn your attention away from the social question which underlies most of the diseases we face today, notably hierarchy, and that hierarchy involves everyone, not only women and blacks or other people of color. It also involves people who are Caucasian, white, call them what you want, Europeans, people who are Asian, and it turns them away from class exploitation, which takes place every day, especially as the working day keeps growing larger and larger and larger. You can take your oppression home now, and through the modern communication system, you can work your head off for 14 hours a day at your home office and think that you're free. And then you get into ideas like an instinct for freedom. The word instinct and freedom are contradictions. Instinct is an imperative. Freedom is in fact the absence of imperative choice. How can you have an instinct for freedom? And then you have other such things like future primitive. First it was neo-primitive, another contradiction in terms. Primitive by definition is not neo, it's old. It goes way back to primal. How can you have a future that goes back to the primal? So you have this kind of loss of the socialist, and I use this in the broadest possible sense. I don't mean the socialist party, the socialist movement, or whatever you like. I'm talking of the socialism of which anarchism is part. A social anarchism, and what it's replaced by is something that is more like a New Age anarchism, or if you want to be generous about it, a lifestyle anarchism. You don't have to go very far to find this. And that's not anarchism to me. That is an insult to the whole tradition of anarchism, which emerged out of the Enlightenment. I mean, I'm told that E.P. Thompson said in his evocation of William Blake, who is a very arguable poet, if you please. Basically, as his wife put it, he lives in paradise all the time. Evocation of in his last book on Blake, that communism is the highest form of mysticism. At that particular point, one doesn't know what to do with the word communism anymore, and I'm talking of communism with a small c. Be it anarcho-communism, be it utopian communism, whatever you like.
Given what you've said so far in the discussion, what do you think would constitute an authentic new left in the present day?
Well, I think first of all we have to recover the left that was and sift out from the left that was all those elements of rationality, that principle of hope. Without that principle of hope, how can one fight for anything? If you think that all is gone and lost, then what you're doing is staging the usual individual blow against the system that variously leads to terrorism at one extreme and to a form of easy accommodation by dressing differently and wearing your hair in another way. To take a very mild extreme, if you want to call it, if the words mild extreme are obviously a contradiction, to take another absurd extreme, both of which I believe are wrong. So I think we have to revive the great traditions of the old left, recognizing that they're not the old left, but they are intrinsic to the left. They define the left. As I indicated, these would have to include reason, and I would hope dialectical reason. And I've written some detail about this in a book called The Philosophy of Social Ecology. It's going to be coming out in September 1994 by Black Rose Books. And it really is important that people who are concerned with an attempt to ecologize the dialectic and to humanize it more in a sense, that they read this and read it with an attempt to understand it rather than to peck at it. Even when I read some of my most distasteful opponents who are very ad hominem in dealing with me, I always try to understand what they say. I enter into the work. It's a way of reading that I have inherited from a long time ago. I think we have to recover the left as anti-capitalist as well as rational. I think we have to recover the internationalism of what is called, quotes, the old left, but which I think is intrinsic to the left as such. I think in addition to that, we have to recover the belief in progress, and at least the possibility of progress, further progress. We have to have a sense that there is a history, that we have come out of something, that we have been an unfolding animal. And we have to learn how to distinguish very carefully with our belief in reason, our belief in history, and our belief in progress, which incidentally constitutes an entire essay that I've written in Green Perspectives. The latest Green Perspectives is called History, Civilization, and Progress. I think we have to recover, in addition to that, the rich libertarian heritage that is waning today into a form of personalism and anarchoid privatism, your temporary autonomous zones. We have to begin to be concerned with technological developments that are environmental friendly, not with a blind, luddite rejection of technology as such, or even a hostility toward technology that really diminishes work if it's used in a rational society. The attempt to make our technology autonomous is, in my opinion, one of the most disgusting, unfortunate diversions that has come out of the writings of people like Langdon Winner and other anti-technologists, and has falsely been imputed, by the way, to Lewis Mumford, which was not the case. I spoke to the man and I know. I think we have to recognize that there has to be a whole educational process that's very, very necessary. I have favored strongly study groups. And that we have to develop a coherent theory, one that is subject to modification, alteration, of necessary total change, but at least a coherent theory, and respect coherence rather than a wild, crazy pluralism that can go in every which way, including toward the right as well as toward the left. And then I think, as I've laid out in many of my pieces, that we have to develop a politics, an entirely new politics, which I think you have on previous tapes. I've discussed that in great detail. What I call libertarian municipalism, which insultingly is dealt with by many people as though I want to enter the state. I, who for decades have opposed entrism into any kind of statist institutions, but a new politics based on what I would call an attempt to achieve a participatory democracy in tension with the nation state, not side by side with the nation state, but in tension with it, as a flagrant slap in the face of the nation state. People just don't understand that. And it's very difficult to get people to think. I mean, something new is happening that I find incomprehensible from the standpoint of my so-called old left, or even new left experiences. It requires a knowledge of the history of the left. We have to know that. And I'm trying to somehow furnish that with a book coming out, possibly early next year, the first volume of which will be called The Third Revolution. People have to know what the left was. And I've written a piece, and it's going to be part of a series of essays that AK Press is going to publish out of San Francisco. And that essay, particularly that I commend to people, is The Left That Was, not